There we go. Okay.
Got it.
I invited your personal at first because I wasn't thinking.
Okay, you're good.
So then I got you now.
I was actually about to, I was in the process of texting you, and then I got the notification that you started. So I was like, oh, gotta go back.
Go back, Grover. Oh my gosh, the animals. Come on, get off. Everyone's touching my stuff. So, yeah, Carolyn knows it's always craziness at my house.
Yeah.
Always. But it's a good behind the scenes of, work-life balance here at our house. So I'm excited for anyone who's joining us live or watching the replay. This is the 4th episode of Thrive Over Survive. And I'm excited about this episode, one, because if you don't know, Carolyn is my sister, and she started her podcast this year, the Search For Serotonin. And I'm excited also because this is the first really non-business episode / interview we're doing for this series. But I think it's really important to give well-rounded tips and well-rounded pieces of advice and real life stories for people. And this one really hits home, and it's such great timing because Carolyn just released her episode on seasonal depression and just struggling with the holidays in general. So I'm really excited for Carolyn to share a little bit about why she started the podcast, kind of what her journey has looked like this far up to this point with us, so you guys can get a better feel for her, because I know the story, but you guys need to hear it.
Yeah. So do you want me to go ahead and just start with my story?
Yeah, just kind of what made you want to start your podcast, the name behind it, because I think that's really cool, and like kind of your mission with it.
Yeah, so I wanted to start this podcast for like a really long time, but I never, thought that I could do it, or never thought it was possible for me. And I was working like a 9-to-5 job. I was in higher education, and I was in grad school, and I was in both of those for about like a year, a little over a year. And then I broke my ankle, which because it happened at your house.
I was thinking about that today. I was like, oh, if she never broke her foot, she probably would have never done that.
No. So I broke my foot at your house, and then I had to go through a major surgery. And I, for the past 4 months, have been like down and out basically. And right. So the first month after surgery, I just had so much downtime, and you start to think when you can't move, or you can't leave the house, or you can't do anything. And I realized I didn't want to be in grad school anymore. I didn't want to work for, anybody else anymore. I wanted to start doing my own thing, and I wanted to start doing what I was passionate about. And so I started watching, videos, master classes, whatever I could do, whatever I could get my hands on. And I just started kind of teaching myself how to get it done. And then, I landed on the idea of this podcast because mental health is something that's really big in my life. I personally have anxiety, depression, OCPD, and then I'm also in the process of getting evaluated for ADHD. So it's something that I deal with every single day. And I know post-pandemic, every day I would go on social media because I couldn't go anywhere. And the more I was on social media, the more I noticed people were posting about, mental health and anxiety and depression and all these symptoms. And the more I saw people post about it, the more I realized like this would be the perfect podcast idea. This would be the perfect thing to talk about. I know so many people could probably use a lot of these topics. And so that's kind of how it got started. But during my recovery process, instead of just, being miserable or wasting my time watching TV, I started doing things that I really enjoyed again. So I would, start coloring, or I'd start drawing. I started reading again, all this different stuff. So I was just trying to I wasn't focused.
You have time for that.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I never had time for this before because I would go to work, from 8:30 to 4:30, and then I would have to do grad school, and then my weekends started getting consumed by grad school. What?
You were so stressed out, and you didn't enjoy it.
It was so miserable, and I was so miserable, and it was so unhealthy. And Corbin's on right now, but he knows what I went through and how that was a terrible process. But I was basically just trying to find, instead of doing what I had to do or what I was supposed to be doing, I just started doing what I wanted to and what brought me happiness and what filled me back up with joy and made me feel like myself again. And so right. I took a leave of absence from grad school. I started to get serious about pushing and creating the podcast, and I launched in mid-November. So we just dropped episode, I want to say it was episode 5. Yeah. And I just wanted to share my own personal stories with mental illness. I wanted to kind of discuss my different diagnosis. This past week was a holiday episode, and I actually open up, just a little bit of a trigger warning, but I open up about suicide and my past experiences, because a lot of mine have to do with around the holiday season. And so I thought, it'd be really beneficial for me to just, be completely vulnerable, completely open, and just share my real, honest, personal, not pretty experiences, in the hopes that, someone else hears it and they feel the same way. So that's kind of the reasoning behind the podcast, how I got to the podcast. At this point, Emma knows I left my 9 to 5. I'm not going back to grad school, and I just want to focus on doing this podcast and pushing my focus towards mental health and helping other people. So that's how we got here.
Yeah, there's so much good stuff to unpack here that I'm excited for people to like hear this conversation, because Carolyn and I have a lot of these conversations behind the scenes, because if anyone doesn't know, Carolyn is helping me in my business with graphics, just like admin tasks, social media, because she's very good at social media. I am not. That's not my forte. She's my sounding board. But we have had this conversation a couple different times with a lot of this stuff she talked about. So the first thing I want to get into before we transition fully into the episode and the seasonal depression tip is, because I think you brought up so many good points of, with the pandemic, people being home, mental health awareness coming on the rise, but not only that, people quitting their 9 to 5 and what everyone's calling this great resignation of 2020 or 2021, whatever you want to call it, because I left my job too pretty early in the pandemic because of just how the corporate world was treating me. Me and Carolyn have very similar stories with, we were basically put in these situations, and corporate higher ups basically were not going to work with us. And, there's like a huge opportunity for people, especially young people like us, to make money in different ways. Can you kind of talk us through, for anyone who might be listening, who's like maybe thinking, I want to make the jump, because Carolyn and I are doing things that are very differently in our businesses. Yeah. I'm an online consultant. I'm doing online service providing. Carolyn's going all in on her podcast. So can you kind of give people insight on what you've learned in the past couple months, and what kind of your game plan was when you decided to leave your 9 to 5 of like making money, because that's a big thing for people, is like the fear of not having the financial stability, maybe like with your mental health. So like your financial plan, or like kind of what your goal is with the podcast and everything, a little bit behind the scenes of that, and any fears that came up as someone with mental health that could maybe help them if they're going through that, in that position, and sitting thinking like, I really want to do this, but I'm just not sure. Like, kind of walk us through like a little bit of that?
Yeah, of course. So in July, when I broke my foot, that's when I decided to take the leave of absence from grad school. And at that point, I basically knew, I was like, I need to change my life completely. Like, this isn't working. Like 9 to 5, all of that is not working for me anymore. I did a lot of thinking on this. I weighed my pros and cons. And at that point, me keeping my 9 to 5 wasn't even beneficial for me, because I wasn't even making enough after, bills were paid and everything was said and done. I was barely getting by. So I was like, why am I wasting 40 hours of my week to go to a job that I'm not able to, make enough money off of, and I'm still miserable, and I'm still just like stressed all of the time, even though I have this consistent paycheck that a lot of people, would look at me and say, you're crazy for giving this up. But for me personally, it wasn't worth my mental health. It wasn't worth, stressing out so much. And I would cry all the time back then. I was just so miserable. And so that's kind of the nice thing about breaking my foot, is I got to work remotely. And so with all that downtime and not having a commute in and out of the office, I was like, I'm going to really focus and be productive and get a plan. So then, by the time my foot's better, I can hopefully leave this 9 to 5 and start doing my own thing. And so it was 4 months of behind the scenes work, a lot of planning, a lot of trial and error. Like, I registered my podcast as an LLC so I could establish myself as a business before even start making like any money or anything like that. And I had a lot of issues with that. I had some people try and push me around, take advantage of me, kind of screw me over. And that was a big,
Which happens a ton in the online space for anyone watching. I want to preface this because this has come up with a bunch of people I've talked to in the past couple of weeks where they've wasted money, didn't get the return on their investment, or they trusted these people because it's such a like easy point of entry for online business, which is a double-edged sword. So you really got to do your research on who you're investing with, and getting reviews. Because I know Carolyn is going through went through a program that has a bunch of great reviews, and the program itself is solid, but they were outsourcing to someone a part of it that was not very good.
Yeah,
so that's
yeah.
just new learning for people right now.
Yeah, and it got weird with that dynamic because I was speaking with a man and he started crossing lines and he was like, oh, but I just want to be friends. Like, let's be friends. And for me, as somebody who is a people pleaser and I'm not always the most assertive person, it was a really big learning moment for me because I'm like, no, if this is going to be your business and this is something you're going to do, you need to stick up for yourself. You need to stick up for your business. And so I told him, I'm like, this isn't a friendship. This is business. This is strictly like a business move. And I'm not going to let you push me around, basically. So it was a lot of trial and error.
People will manipulate you if you don't
exactly. So it was a lot of trial and error. But I finally got to the point where I got the LLC established, and basically once I got that go ahead, I was like, okay, so I can start launching this podcast because I'm established as an LLC. And if anything were to happen like legally or anything like that, it wouldn't come back as at me personally. It would be under the LLC and the business. So once I got that set up, I didn't really know exactly how I was going to make money. Like, I've had plans for how I was going to bring in revenue and things like that. But I was just like, let's get this launched. Let's get the podcast out there. Let's start pushing it on social. Let's start growing on social media. And I was like, even though I'm not necessarily like ready or I don't have a full plan, I'm just going to start because the sooner I start doing it, the better I'm going to get, the more practice I'm going to have. And then I can kind of figure it out as I go. So I actually was able to put in my 2 weeks and leave my job prior to launching. I was able to do that because I'm fortunate enough to live with my boyfriend, and I was able to lean on him financially for a little bit. I had my own personal savings saved up. So since I left my 9-to-5, I've been relying on my personal savings. And then obviously if I need anything, my boyfriend's working and he has an income. So him being there has been really great for me because I have that support. So I was able to leave my 9-to-5, even though I wasn't necessarily bringing in any revenue yet. But the decision to leave my 9-to-5 really had to do with my mental health and the fact that, I was still not able to walk or able to drive at that point. And so I still wasn't able to go into the office and do all of the things I was supposed to be doing at my job. And so I was like, why not leave and do something that I can do more remotely and then free up that position for somebody who is fully able-bodied and able to come into the office and able to do everything that they need to. So I kind of made that decision because and you brought me on as your assistant. So I was like, okay, I have some security. I have some things brought up or something set up, so I'm good to go and I can make this leap comfortably, and then I'll kind of just figure it out as I go. But I've been doing this for like a month now. I still haven't generated any revenue yet, but that's normal when you start a business. It takes a while to get things rolling. And podcasting is a different type of online business. It's not as easy as, oh, I'm going to get clients or I'm going to do coaching. I'm trying to make money from different avenues and different ways. And some of those ways I can't start doing until I get more of a following. But I'm trying to look into some new things, and I'm going to start trying to look into like merch and things like that to start maybe bringing in some revenue at the beginning of 2022. So it's definitely a scary leap and it's hard to do. But basically it came down to my happiness and my mental health, which the whole premise of this podcast. So
which is very value driven, like very much on brand for you, very much on value, which I wanted people to hear that story because I see so many women and I see so many people who are like hiding in their 9-to-5. They're very afraid. They don't want to take the leap without like a strategic plan, which is very much how I was. But being able to say F it and leave, and I didn't have a full plan either. I kind of had a plan, but like anyone watching, the plan don't always go according to plan. And I'm very fortunate as well to have someone who was able to support me and my dream for a couple months. So I think that also is great to hear, like, because some women, it's hard for them to trust or lean on their partner or have that conversation. So that's important. It's okay not to have a plan. I wanted people to hear that part as well, because it is scary, but messy action's better than no action.
Yeah.
And I think that, it is hard for people to understand the behind the scenes of how do you monetize a podcast? How do you monetize content? How do you monetize? Like Carolyn has had ideas to monetize part of her Instagram as it grows and things like that, which is also still, you have to grow to get there, but there are other ways to monetize on information and content, especially nowadays. That is so important, I think, for people to be aware of. But that was great that you like touched on all of those, and it's very much a trend right now, which I think is so important, and very different from what I do, but there's different ways to make money, like you said, online. So thank you for sharing, because I know that's hard and not easy to do, but people love to see the behind the curtain of, the finance piece or the fear piece. And, Carolyn brought up she suffers from a couple different kinds of mental illnesses, and that's like an everyday battle for her. And I can relate because I have my own, as we are sisters. We come from the same home. We have had very similar experiences, but very different outcomes in like our mental health and our journeys. So I think that's an interesting dynamic that we can talk about as well. But everyday kind of stuff, how do you deal with the mental health or the fear and the doubt that comes up? Because I know that's something else, and then we can talk about the seasonal stuff as well after.
Yeah. One quick thing I did want to mention is just about like my 9 to 5. It wasn't like when I was leaving my 9 to 5, it wasn't like I wasn't good at my 9 to 5, or like it wasn't,
right,
something that I liked, because I liked higher education. I loved working with students. I loved talking to people and that kind of stuff. And it wasn't that, I was on the verge of getting fired or I was bad at it or anything like that. It was just something that I knew wasn't serving me in the way that I wanted to, and I wanted to kind of just do more of what I was passionate about. So if somebody is in a 9 to 5 and they're like, well, I'm really good at my 9 to 5 and it doesn't make sense for me to leave because I'm good at it, you can be good at it and still not want to do it, So I wanted to just mention that very quickly. But yeah, so
I got the same spiel when I left my 9 to 5. Like the higher ups were like, oh, you should stay, or we had such big hopes for you. And I'm like, yeah, you have such big hopes for me in 5 years, maybe, because they're just trying to get me to stay. So, but I can get there a lot quicker on my own because you have more control and more flexibility when you're doing it for yourself.
Exactly.
So I definitely resonate with that.
Yeah. So everyday anxiety, dealing with like starting my business and launching this podcast. It's definitely hard when you're starting a business. It does bring a lot of anxiety, especially when you're doing one that's like online, because you have to post, and you have to post publicly, and like everybody you follow on social media is going to start seeing that. And then your anxiety kicks in, and then you start thinking, oh my God, are people going to think like, oh, that's embarrassing for her, or why is she doing this, or that's not a business, or that's not a way to make money, blah, 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 blah. Like
people pleasing comes up.
All this self-doubt. But I have to remind myself why I'm doing this, because it's also harder with a podcast because I'm sharing my own personal experiences, like my deepest, darkest, like ugliest moments. And airing that out on the internet is not simple because there's always that fear of, are people not going to accept this? Are people going to reject this? Are people going to tell me I'm insane? Like, are they going to think this is stupid? And so just reminding myself why I did this. And, I basically did this. I did a lot of like journaling and a lot of internal work in the 4 months that I was planning this podcast, because I really wanted to dig into, why are we doing this? Why are we going forward with this podcast? And essentially, really why I wanted to start this podcast is because I thought back to myself 10 years ago, when I was 14 years old. And those were some of the darkest moments of my life, some of the hardest days of our childhood, honestly. And I just thought about her, and how scared she was and how afraid she was and how I never saw a future for myself and all these kind of things. And I was like, I need to share these stories and talk to people, because it's basically I'm talking to my 14-year-old self. Like, these are all the things that I wish someone would have told me at 14 when I was anxious, I was depressed, I didn't know what was going on, and I didn't know what I was experiencing was mental illness. So I was like, if, you know, I'm not doing it for myself, I'm doing it for who I was 10 years ago and people who were in that same situation that I was in 10 years ago. And so just the hope that, you know, somebody can benefit from this and maybe not get to as dark of a place that I got to. And so it's been really hard to like silence the voices in my head and the anxiety and the self-doubt and the self-criticism. But once I put out my first 2 episodes, the feedback and just the amount of people that reached out was insane. Like, people that I haven't heard from in a really long time, like people we used to go to grade school with reached out, people I used to work with in college who I never would have thought like struggled with mental illness. And everybody just started sharing their own personal experiences with me. And they were like, I resonated with this so much and this made so much sense. And then even after I put out my episode on Monday, I had more people reaching out saying like, I had no idea. Like, I had this one girl from college who was a little bit younger than me, and she was like, I have always looked up to you. I always thought you had it so together in college. I tried to like be like you. And so to hear that you were struggling and going through all this, like, makes me respect you and look up to you even more, because it shows that, like, you know, everyone thought you were together, but you're just another person. And I was like, I never would have thought that I had it together. Like, I knew
you
I
don't
was
feel like
like, I'm just good at hiding it. Like, I don't know. But,
that
yeah, and just hearing everyone's feedback has really helped me just continue to be vulnerable and continue to be just my authentic self every week. And I don't get that after every episode. You know, the first week I got a lot of feedback because it was new. And then this week it was a really big personal topic. So I got a lot of feedback. But the couple weeks in between then, you know, nobody was reaching out. Or, you know, like a couple weeks ago, I put out a depression episode and it hasn't got as many listens as the other ones. But just because one episode doesn't do as well or people don't praise me for it doesn't mean that I should give up or I need to stop going. Like, I just have to remember that, you know, other people can think what they want, but this is what I'm doing and I'm doing it for myself and I'm going to keep going my way. And if people want to follow along for that journey, then that's on them. If they don't, then that's not my business.
Yeah, consistency is key. There has been plenty of posts I put out that get less than 10 views or less than 10 anything, or trainings I've poured my heart into that no one really like I thought people would love it. Crickets, you know, it's like that's the journey that is going to, which I'm going to talk about next week on my like solo episode, because people don't see the whole journey sometimes. Like, people that are close to you see the whole journey, like of the struggle of the consistency. But yeah, like you said, there is so much fear that comes up for, you know, how is this going to be received? What if someone doesn't like it? And I was listening to a book this morning, and she said, you know, she was talking about how she was worried about people not accepting her for her accent. Well, no one's ever going to love, like, you're never going to please 100% of the people. So doing it for those people or that select group is so important. And Carolyn brought up another great point of doing it the first time or releasing for the first time is always the scariest and hardest. Like, when I went on my first podcast to share about domestic violence, I was like, oh my God, same things came up. Like, what if people don't resonate? What if people think I'm the bad guy? What if, you know, I hurt someone's feelings that's in my family? Or, you know, what if this comes back to retaliate against me or something like that? But you're not sharing it for you. You're sharing it to help other people and give voice and light to a topic that I think has been silenced for so long. And mental health awareness especially is very much on the rise. So for the season, why do you think the seasons are the hardest? Like, I know you have your own personal experience. We kind of share similar experiences because, like Carolyn and I mentioned, we grew up in the same household. We grew up with the same things, but we also have very different perspectives on things because of our age. Not that our age difference is that big, but we're our own people. We have our own personalities. It just goes to show different things trigger and affect different people, and that does not make their story or their experience any less. So why do you think it's so hard for the holidays? And can you share some of the tips? I know you posted some on your Instagram and shared some in the episode. So
Yeah. So my biggest thing about like the holiday season is like daylight savings and the time change. And
ooh, I didn't think about that.
yeah, because then it starts getting dark at like 4 p.m. And when
Yeah.
you're already experiencing like clinical depression, which is ongoing depression, and then it starts to get dark at 4, you just kind of go into this place where you're like, oh, it's so depressing outside. I'm already depressed. It's 4 p.m. Let me just hibernate in the dark and go to bed and just like spend a lot of time in bed and like take depression naps and things like that.
Right.
So I think that plays into it because like, you know, the holidays are already in like cold months and you don't want to be going outside. And so it's easy to just be like, oh, well, my depression just wants me to go to bed or wants me to stay in the dark or just doesn't want me to do anything. And so it's easy to fall into these patterns of just, you know, not putting yourself out there. And then that pushes you further and further and further into the depression. So I think that's why seasonal depression hits me pretty hard, is just the lack of sunlight and the lack of motivation to do anything. And it's harder to do things, especially like get outside. Like I love hiking. I love taking walks. Like I love just being outside and things like that. But you can't really do that when it's cold, snowy, rainy, dark, and like wet outside. So
Yeah.
you have to really kind of make a conscious effort to find things that work for you. So last year when we were in the pandemic and we couldn't do anything, I was kind of more aware of my seasonal depression because we were already inside and kind of falling into those patterns. Um, but I was like, I need to do something for myself so I don't get more and more depressed as like seasonal depression progresses.
Yeah.
So something that like Corbin and I started doing is we would do soup Sundays, or like every weekend we'd pick out a new soup recipe. And so we would do that as a way to like get some root vegetables and get some health back into our life. And that routine kind of
Yeah,
became
that's
something,
important.
yeah, that's something we looked forward to every single week during the pandemic because it was something we were doing that was good for us. It was, you know, nice because then on Monday and Tuesday when I was really depressed or really not feeling it and I didn't want to cook, instead of like getting takeout or eating junk, we would just have leftover soup on hand and ready to go. So that really helped. That's one routine. Cooking in general just really became a great thing for us because it's something that, you know, we do every day.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was never good at it in college, and just going on Pinterest and finding quick like 30-minute recipes and just trying new stuff and like actually getting up and doing it. And it was something I could do inside. It wasn't, you know, very time consuming, but it still got me, you know, off the couch or out of bed. And I was able to kind of get into those routines. And now that's something that we still do every night. We cook together. We kind of put our phones away. We'll listen to a podcast or listen to music. We'll dance around the kitchen. Like we'll have really great conversations during that time. So that's something that I always look forward to, especially during seasonal depression time. Um, Again, a lot of like indoor hobbies like reading, coloring books, in-home workouts, journaling, like that kind of stuff can be really great during seasonal depression because those are all things, once again, you can do inside, you can do from your bed if you need to, but you're still kind of being productive and you're still kind of motivating yourself. Last year, Corbin and I got paid by numbers. So if we were
Oh, yeah.
feeling kind of like crappy, we would just be like, let's paint. And so again, we throw on like podcast or music and we do our little paint by numbers from Amazon. They were like $10 each. And that really helped with the seasonal depression because once again, it's a nice activity. It's something you really don't have to think about. It's not exerting a lot of mental energy. So even if you're depressed or you're kind of sad or you're just not in the mood, it's something that you don't have to think about. You don't have to talk during it if you don't want to.
Right.
So those are always things that I recommend for like seasonal depression and combating that.
And I know some people, if you guys go to the gym, like I know Caroline and Corbin they were members of gyms. I don't know if you guys are still a member at the Planet Fitness, but our local one in Pittsburgh, the Fitness 19, they have infrared light, like therapy, like they also have a tanning bed, but I'm not a
Mm-hmm.
tanning person.
Yeah.
But the infrared therapy is also safe and something if you're a gym member, like a lot of gyms are starting to have that kind of stuff. And that can also be a great source of like you need to get out of the house, just physical movement in general.
Yeah.
Like I never, like, I still go to the gym and I'm, what, 7 months pregnant. Not that I'm like tooting my own horn, but like, I go in and I'm like, people give me weird looks. They're like, what the F are you doing here? And like, what, and I don't get self-conscious anymore, but if even if you go and walk on the treadmill and listen to a podcast for 20 minutes and like that helps, or going in like is using the infrared light, it like is also very good for your skin. They have some, I mean, if you want to do the tanning bed, go for it. That's light and UV rays and probably makes you feel good. There's just defining what makes you feel good is the key, I think.
Yeah.
That you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Like it can be anything. Like these are just things that I found to help me last year during the pandemic. Because like I said, when I'm depressed, I don't want to leave the house. I don't want to go to the gym because then that induces a lot of anxiety. But I know a lot of people, will go to the gym, and then those infrared things are great to use to help boost your mood. Something I've been meaning to try.
You can buy one on Amazon. If someone has the money, you might be able to buy an at-home version or like a smaller version of that, just for the light.
Smart. And they also,
I've seen people do it for their desk. They have like a little light, or like they have like a little plant, and they put it on their desk, and it like is supposed to help with their energy and just providing them a little extra.
Yeah. I was gonna say they also have like sun lamps on Amazon too. So those are really great for helping with seasonal depression because it like emulates sunlight. So even if you can't get out, or it's like today in Erie, it's like snowy and gray and crappy. So if I had like one of those lights, it'd be a nice way to like brighten things up indoors when it's kind of gross outside too. So those are always great. Like you can get those on Amazon.
So I also want to touch on, since holidays are also, I feel like, stressors for people, and Carolyn and I both suffer from people pleasing really bad, and she has her type of anxiety. I have general anxiety. I don't share about it as much, but I do deal with anxiety and OCD tendencies. So I think a big trigger for people, I know it's my trigger, it's your trigger, and as people pleasers, how to deal with. And Carolyn and I talked about this privately, and I don't know how much she's going to share in here. You don't have to share as much if you don't want to. Dealing with family members, because that gives people anxiety really, really bad. Like sometimes, the questions or like just being in that group setting, things like that.
Yeah. So this week in my episode, I really talked about like mental health in the holidays. And like I found a statistic from the National Alliance on Mental Illness that says around the holidays, 64% of those already dealing with mental illnesses have their symptoms or experiences worsened around the holiday season. And that can be from a number of things, like family dynamics plays a big part in that, and how your home life is or who you're spending your holiday with. Like in my episode, I talked about how when social media started to get big, I used to get a lot of anxiety around the holidays because everyone would be posting, what they were doing and how many people they were with and like, what presents they were getting. And so then that would like internalize like a lot of anxiety for me because I would see that and I would think, oh, well, I'm not with my extended family like on these days when everyone else is, or people are getting nicer gifts than me. And it just added a lot of stress and pressure because like our holidays always look different than a lot of most people's. And so for a really long time, I felt like, oh, like I need to hide that. I can't show people my holiday because it's not what everyone else's is like, and no one's going to understand. And I don't want people to think like I'm weird or ask questions or things like that.
Which I would like to specify for anyone who's watching, we also did not grow up in like a divorce home.
No.
Like not that, I want to make that clear too. Like that's another level of its own issues of like having to split time between family, which I know is difficult now because I have dealt with that in the past couple of years with Charlotte and other family that we have, seeing how that can affect people. But I would like to just preface that, but the holidays were always extra stressful, and not saying like our parents are bad parents.
Yeah.
They have always tried to go above and beyond, but they have generational trauma that they never learned how to deal with or were never aware of because mental illness was never talked about for them. So now it's like they are realizing it as we've struggled with it and brought it up. I just wanted to preface that for anyone watching. It's that that we have had. It's trauma within a single family home.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
really trauma, that's a strong word, but there's different levels. So I just wanted to point that out for people watching.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so like ways to cope with it, like I talked about in my episode, like unplugging from social media, because even if it is like other people in your life, or maybe you're comparing your like holiday on social media to maybe some of your family members, if like they're doing different things, just not allowing yourself to look at those kind of things and stress about those kind of things, because that's not the point of your holidays. It's not to compare yourself to everyone else or stress yourself out over what everyone else is doing. It's supposed to be time for you to relax and spend it with the people that you care about and hopefully have a good time. But if you're already dealing with mental illness, just pushing yourself further into a social media like rabbit hole isn't going to help. So unplugging from social media is a great way, because then you don't feel that pressured, like, oh, I need to post, or I need to make a story to show everybody that like I'm doing this, you know? And then
And it's typically very fake. As someone who's also put up a fake front when things were bad, it is usually very much fake.
and social media is like a highlight reel of everyone's life. They're only showing you good stuff. They're only showing you the best moments, the pretty moments. They're not showing you, like, you could take a story and look like you're having the best time ever, and then as soon as you post the story, like everyone breaks out fighting, or you're miserable, or you're like not talking to anybody. So people are really good at making it seem like it's way better than it is on social media. So for the holidays already being a hard time, and then you kind of like putting yourself in that environment where everyone's just showing their best moments, it's really not healthy for somebody who's struggling mentally with like anxiety and depression and those kinds of things. Another thing I talked about in my episode was setting boundaries, because
Oh yeah, I'm hoping you agree with that.
yeah. So with the holidays, there's a lot of traditions and a lot of things that people are expected to do, you know, with your family. If you go and do a certain activity every year, or you have a certain ritual every year, but you know that event or tradition brings you a lot of anxiety or a lot of depression, or maybe if you have like OCD and it stresses you out, don't do the tradition. Just because it's a tradition, you don't have to do it, you know? Set boundaries, stick to those boundaries. Like if you maybe have like 5 or 6 traditions, and you know, like mentally you're drained and you don't have enough energy to do all of that, pick your top priorities, you know? Pick the top 2 that are most important to you and save your energy for those traditions. And don't do the ones that are going to make you more anxious or make you more depressed or push you further into mental struggles, you know? And so just kind of setting those down. What?
Or communicating it to the people. Like that's really hard and really scary for some people, but if you don't tell people how you feel, they probably don't know. And if they do, this is like the biggest thing I had to learn. If you communicated it in a healthy way and people are still disrespecting your boundaries, then it's time to question whether or not you need that person in your life. Or if it's like they're not gonna listen, then they're disrespecting you. So do you want to keep dealing with someone that's disrespecting you? Because it's so subtle. I don't think people realize it or are aware of it as being disrespectful, but you know, that's a part of boundaries as well, is sticking to what makes you feel comfortable in your life.
Yeah, exactly. And if like you're somebody who doesn't necessarily experience mental illness, I put up an Instagram post about this today about communicating. Let's say you notice someone in your life who's acting a little differently, or they just don't seem themselves. Go ahead and take the initiative to communicate to them, like, hey, you don't have to say like, oh, you seem depressed, or oh, you seem anxious, or something seems off. You can just say, you know, hey, like, I know we do this every year, this is something that we usually like look forward to, but we don't have to do it this year. We can skip it this year. That's okay. So just communicating to people in your life, especially if you know they struggle with mental illness, and letting them know, hey, I don't have any expectations from you, even though this might be a tradition or this might be something that we always look forward to. If it's too much this year, we don't have to do it. So it goes both ways. Yes, if you are the one struggling, you should definitely speak up. And the respect thing is huge. If people aren't respecting you, just because it's the holidays doesn't mean you need to sit there and take disrespect or abuse or, you know, being strong armed or anything like that. Yeah. And so speak up for yourself, but also it's just another thing of other people who don't necessarily struggle, just to be more mindful and be more aware, and just give people a little bit more kindness and a little bit more compassion, and just say, hey, there's no expectations. If you want to, great, but if not, I'm not going to be disappointed. Because instead of letting that person who might have anxiety and depression sit there and think, oh, I have to do this because they're going to get mad at me, or they're going to get upset, or I can't tell them how I feel, so I just have to go and suffer through it. It's just so much nicer when somebody reaches out and says, hey, like, there's no expectations, and then they don't have to explain themselves, which is nice.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's another thing I want to bring up is, like, Carolyn and I have very different perspectives on it, I think, too, because like I mentioned, we have two different personalities. So sometimes it is nice. Like, I don't think I'm like, oh, I can speak up for myself. But I mean, I've learned to do that. But some people, it's very hard to speak up for themselves. So, you know, being the one to allow them that space is so important. And just as being aware of other people around you this holiday season, who, even if you don't know if they're suffering from mental illness, because they probably are suffering and you don't know it, you never want to flat out say, like, oh, or like, are you depressed? Because it's going to be hard for someone to say that. You know, you could just be like, hey, I noticed you're acting a little off, or I'm just here for you. Like, there's different ways to say it, and don't ever go in with that. Like, that's like asking someone if they're pregnant and you're not sure if they're pregnant.
Exactly.
You know, like, ask them gently. Don't be so direct. You know, people might not want to talk about it. So just being there for someone, giving them, like, I like how you in your post today, you posted about, you know, just give them some of your time, give them the space they need. And that's such a fine line too, is like, when do I give someone space and when do I not? Because with mental health, it could vary of like when to give them space, or when they need like some not intervention, I don't want to use that word, but shouldn't be left alone, because it's a scale, you know. You have to
and that's always tricky too. But like I mentioned in my post and my episode, you know, spending time with the people in your life, just showing them that you're there, that you're willing to show up, that you're going to listen to them. In my post, I said, give someone a listening ear, ask them how they're doing, you know, instead of just like talking about yourself when you're with this person. Take a second and say, yeah, exactly. And say, like, how are you doing? And don't take good, fine, or okay as an example. Ask them how they're actually doing, and then just shut up and listen, because you don't need to try and fix their problem. You don't need to give them advice. You don't need to lecture them. Sometimes people who are struggling just want someone to hear them out, because, you know, there's a lot going on in their head, and sometimes just opening up about it and laying it all flat out and just getting it out there really helps. And you don't want always to be told what to do next or what the next steps need to be. Sometimes you just want to say, hey, everything's shitty right now, and I just want to get it out and have someone listen. So just like giving someone that space to listen to them is really great. And then what else I was going to say? Oh yeah, spending time with people, like you said, instead of just flat out asking, are you depressed? Are you anxious? You know, in my episode, like I said, I talked a little bit about suicide, instead of just being like, hey, are you having like suicidal thoughts or things like that? Instead of going to those questions and you're noticing, just be like, hey, let's go take a drive together. And you don't have to bring up those topics. You can just, like I said, listen. Or you can be like, let's go to the mall and walk around for a little bit, or let's go grab a coffee. And you don't need to necessarily fill that time with a lot of, you know, like I said, lecturing back and forth or advice or things like that. You can just spend that time together. And so it's a nice way to show you that person that you're there for them, kind of get them out of that environment. Because if you're in a crazy household with a lot of other family members, kind of isolating yourself just down to like a smaller group makes it a little bit more like tolerable and makes it a little bit easier to breathe, especially when you're struggling. And just knowing that you have like one or two people you can really confide in is really huge. So those are some great ways to kind of go about those situations without directly saying like, hey, are you depressed, you know?
Yeah. And just being self-aware, I guess, is also a hard thing to do, because for a long time, you know, personally, and I'm sure people can relate, it's like, you don't even know it's triggering you, because you didn't know, like, you don't know until you know.
Yeah.
And you'll just like feel this anxiety bubbling up. So just being aware, like, because Carolyn also knows, like, I suffered from like total anger issues when I was younger, and it was not until I had Charlotte that I really was able to like understand where that was coming from or what was triggering it. So, being self-aware and being like, okay, I have these feelings coming up. What is going to be my game plan of, do I need to walk away? Like, how do I exit the room? Not just saying it has to be on you, because like we said earlier, people should be able to help you,
Yeah.
but knowing how you respond to things is so important, so that you have a plan, like when you're in that situation with other people. Um, just like, do I need to walk away? What's going to help in a healthy coping way? Not drinking a bunch of alcohol, because that's what I used to do.
Yeah, that's
And
another big thing is substance abuse goes really like commonly with anxiety and depression, and that can be the easiest coping mechanism to turn to during the holidays, just because everybody has alcohol, everybody's drinking, you're at Christmas parties and things like that. So it's easy to just calm those anxious nerves or quiet those depressed thoughts by just drinking a ton. But that's not going to do anything except make you feel worse and then heighten those symptoms that you're already experiencing. So trying to find healthy ways, like I said, like go for a drive, go take a walk, pull someone one-on-one, those kinds of things.
yeah.
It's a lot healthier than just like, turning to substance abuse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think is important to bring up in this setting.
Mm-hmm.
Carolyn and I have experienced our own different ways with that. And so it does hit home, I think, for a lot of people, that it's easy to just turn to a drink, or it's easy to, I don't know, whatever your thing is, like go for a cigarette if you're trying to quit, or, if you're trying to do whatever to like, that's the habit that you want to break. That's like when you're trying to work on your mental illness, when you're trying to work on breaking that habit, you have to be super aware and super cognitive of, oh, I need to not fall into the habit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
At least that's something I experienced, and I know other people in different ways, because you're like, it's easier to just like do this, but I have to be, and I think that's the part that no one talks about, is like the cognitive awareness that that you were talking about before, like
Mm-hmm.
every day. You have to work on this, and it's like something you're gonna do until you can make better habits for yourself, or like get into a good spot or a good rhythm, things like that.
Yeah, and like you said earlier, like just being self-aware and identifying those triggers and what you need to do kind of goes hand in hand with being aware of like the drinking or substance abuse or things like that. But that's easier said than done. It takes a really long time to get to that point where you can self-identify your triggers and make a game plan from where you need to go, or self-identify that you're reaching for a drink for the wrong reasons. And for me, it took a lot of therapy to get to that point, and a lot of like working through stuff, because I used to be a really anxious drinker. If I was in new or unfamiliar situations, or especially around the holidays where things might have been a little bit heavy, I would get this anxiety. So it was just really easy for me to just have a drink in my hand and drink it. So when I didn't know what to say or I didn't know what to do, I would just drink. But then you speed through your drinks really quickly, and then you end up getting like more drunk than you think, and it then induces more anxiety. So it's not a good way to cope.
Yep, exactly. No, that's a very good point. And I think it's something that it is easier said than done. And it's something that we both continue to work on cognitively. It's not a subconscious thing at all by any means. We are still working on things like that, with the mental health. So it's like just good, I think, to bring light to that people do struggle with it, and it's okay that you struggle with it. And I love how you said earlier too, not comparing your situation to other people's. Like as you're seeing them in the holidays, maybe it is best to unplug right now. And just because someone else maybe, don't compare the good and don't compare the bad. You are your own person, so your feelings are valid. You can feel like this is hard or this is too much or whatever you need to feel. Like I think a lot of people, I'm bringing it up because I'm like, oh well, our life seems so good, or like our memories were so good. Like I didn't have this or this happened to me, so I don't deserve to feel sad. I don't deserve to feel bad for myself, or I don't like, I don't, whatever the case may be, if you're experiencing it, like comparison up or comparison down, like your feelings are valid and your own life experience is your own is like one thing I would like to for anyone watching to bring to light. Like if you are feeling sad, it's okay to feel sad, you know, or it's okay to feel like that was your experience, own it, and just have a game plan of like what's going to make you feel better.
Yeah, and that's like a thing that I struggled with for a really long time, and that's why I kind of like denied my diagnosis or felt like an imposter in my like diagnosis of mental health, is because, looking back on everything, I was like, no, like I have good memories, like I was happy, like I have a good life, I have all of this and this, so
Yep.
I don't qualify to be depressed, like I have it like
Oh yeah.
better than other people. And that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that you can't still be depressed or still have anxiety or still get sad or still get really upset and struggle, because it affects all of us the same. It doesn't matter, male, female, non-binary, whatever your skin color is, whatever your religion, whatever it is, we're all affected by mental illness all the same. We all struggle. It can happen to anybody, and you don't need to have this list of struggles or, say, well, I can't be depressed because someone else has it worse than I
Right.
do. Your feelings and your experiences are still valid, and that doesn't mean you can't get help, because if you need help, you need to get help. And then another thing you said that I really liked was that social media unplugging, comparing everyone to the good and the bad. I was on Facebook last night, and it was one of those like end of the year, like share all of the good stuff that happened to you in 2021 and how like it was so great for you. And I almost like shared it and wrote a post, but I was like, I didn't have like the energy at that point. It was kind of like towards the time where I was like getting off my phone for the night. But I'm like, why do we only have to share the good? This year, not a lot of good things happened to me. I started a podcast, I started a business. That was great. I left my 9 to 5 and started showing up for myself a lot more, which was great. But,
Yeah.
it's still, we're in a pandemic, and I broke my foot, and I was really depressed for a really long time. And it was really hard for me because I'm relearning how to go about my life, because still like my foot's not fully functionable. Like I can walk and stuff, but I'm not back at the same pace that I was before. So I went through really a lot of hard things that had me, depressed and everything, like I said,
Yeah.
but I'm still learning from those things, and those things are still making me grow. And now I'm ready to go into this new year with all of the stuff that I learned from. But it's, you go on social media and everyone's like, share the good, brag about the good, what happened that was good. Like, there's so many other factors that are going into it that people only want to talk about those good things, or people only want to post about the good things. But it goes to show you, that like everyone goes through hard stuff, and that doesn't mean that the hard stuff always has to be bad. It can be good, it can be valuable, it can propel you forward and help you change your situation. So a lot of people want to focus on just those specific topics, but just because you don't have as many good experiences this year as someone else doesn't mean you need to negate your experiences.
Yep, exactly. And that's something I'm going to share for anyone watching or, watching the replay. Next week is going to be all about, and I got a lot of good feedback from people when I put out my email last week of not hitting my goals. I mean, I put a positive spin on it because I think that you can take a positive spin away from anything negative. I'm like, if I can take a positive spin away from getting beat up and just like making light of it, then I can do it with anything. Which I know is like not a common thing, and it's not like it is easier said than done. It didn't
Mm-hmm.
happen overnight that I put a positive spin on this, or I didn't. It takes time maybe to see the lesson or the value in what you went through, because like in the moment you're really upset and you can't see clearly. Same with Carolyn and her foot. It's hard to see it in the middle, but now she's kind of more on the other side, so she can reflect. And that's what this time should be about at the end of the year, is reflecting on, okay, if something didn't work or if you didn't hit your goal, why? Maybe like there's no bad reason for it. Just reflecting and learning from it is honestly the best way to go about it, because it doesn't make you worse of a person. I didn't hit my big goals, but that's okay. I learned this, this, and this from it. So that's what I'm going to take into the new year.
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know, this wasn't very healthy, or this was very healthy for me. I'm going to leave one thing in the this year and take the healthy thing with me. So it's like that's a good time right now for reflection. But sharing the struggle is very important to both of us because it's hard to do for other people. And I had someone DM me last week and say like, I'm so jealous of like how your business is, and that's what I'm going to share about next week too.
Yeah.
Is like no one, like some people saw, if you've been following me for a while, I try to share vulnerable stories about like just balancing everything, but it's not all sunshine and rainbows as people may think it is on the
Mm-hmm.
outside. So
Yeah.
that's what I think
Yeah,
I
because
want to
once again, you
leave
can like make it appear a certain way to people, but that's not always the reality. And then how you were saying, you didn't hit your goals, but you learn from it and you go forward. Bringing that back to mental health, it's the same way. Like, even though things don't always go as planned, and like I personally have gone through like several different medication combos to find the one that works for me, or I've gone through, periods where I go to therapy and then I'm like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. And then I'll go to my therapist, and then things get bad again. Then I have to keep going back. And it's a, give and take process. And you go through ups and downs, and it's a roller coaster, and it's not consistent, and it's not always wins. You sometimes get knocked down, but as long as you keep going and you get back up and you learn from those things and you keep trying to get better and just do the best that you can, that can be applied for mental health, that can be applied for business, that can be applied for your personal life. As long as you just keep going and you keep trying and you just do your best, that's all you can really ask for, honestly.
consistency is key. And for anyone who, I keep saying this, but it's just like I'm not saying it to just for you, I'm saying it for everyone. Is I love therapy. I think therapy is great. I've gone through therapy. I've learned a lot, paid a lot.
Oh yeah.
But there's more ways out there. If you're struggling this holiday season and maybe aren't comfortable with therapy, I think that's the biggest thing I've learned as an online business owner, just because I've gotten to connect with so many people. There are a lot of alternative ways to find healing and find help that isn't therapy. Like therapy is I'm 100% back therapy, but if you're not seeing the results, like Carolyn mentioned, there's like eating healthier. That like what you put into your body is so huge. I went to a live podcast recording a couple weeks ago, and the woman started it's like she sells dry goods, but
Mm-hmm.
her mission and her value behind it is like they're all clean. They can work with any diet, and it's like all about her story and with her daughter, and like what you put into your body really affects like your mental and your physical health in other ways that aren't talked about. So it's just like there's your health, there's your, physical activity, but there's also like alternative forms of therapy. If you're not sure of where to go, please reach out to Carolyn or myself after this if you're watching the replay. And if you have questions about like, hey, I'm struggling with like therapy or it's not working, will you provide me any resources? Because I know I've done like spiritual healings, I've done rapid transformation therapy, I've done journaling, just like, I've looked into law of attraction, I've looked into mindset books. Like there's just, there's ways that are cost effective as well that aren't just therapy that can help you if you are struggling.
Yeah. And one of the things I do want to say about therapy is like I was in therapy prior to this current therapist that I'm with right now, and I wouldn't see results because I wouldn't be honest, I wouldn't be vulnerable, and I wouldn't actually open up about what I was actually dealing with. I would still kind of go into that mode where I'm like, oh, I have to keep the rose-colored glasses on and I have to paint this perfect image. So I was paying to go to therapy to put out an act for this therapist and not actually dive into my issues because I wasn't there at that point. I wasn't ready to open up about that stuff yet. Or maybe like, sometimes it wasn't the right therapist, so I didn't feel comfortable telling them certain things and like I would just try and hide stuff. So therapy is helpful, but you also have to be in a place where you're willing and ready and, emotionally available to open up about all of this stuff and actually dive in and do the work. That can be hard though, because as I've gotten more serious with my therapy journey in the past 2 years, diving in and doing the work and dealing with the stuff head on, it's great because you have all these weights lifted off of you, but then, you know, it's hard because you have to process those emotions and things that you maybe didn't process the first time. So it's hard to relive that stuff. But I found therapy to work the best for me. I know, like Emma said, there's so many other things out there and there's so much else you can do. Another thing with social media and everything, I've seen a lot more therapy options available online that are more cost effective. I know I've seen a lot where you can do like therapy for like $1 a day or something like that. And they're starting to offer sites where you can go on. And if you don't want to do like in person, there's telehealth, there's also chat features. There's certain platforms where you can go on and pick exactly what type of therapist you want. So if you want someone who's younger versus older, or male versus female, or you maybe want somebody who's non-binary and can help you with certain issues, I think therapy is evolving more than what it used to be. Yeah, because I do telehealth now. I've never met my current therapist in person, but telehealth has allowed me to actually dive into the process of therapy because I finally feel comfortable because I'm doing it from my pajamas, from my own home, you know? So,
and there's a lot of nonprofits, I will say, forming groups to provide it to people who don't have the resources. If you haven't gone because of finances or insurance, there are a lot of groups, especially local to Pittsburgh, that are making a push to provide services, especially to minority groups or underrepresented groups. Like I know of one specifically in Pittsburgh. They're a nonprofit specifically for African American males, and they really started with everything going on with the movement and that happened in the last year, the riots, things like that. Just being able to provide a space for them because they've had it, so they don't sometimes want to share, or it's hard for them to share, or they don't have the resources, whatever the case may be. So this group is forming and growing and providing those mental health resources. So there are things now for a plethora of people.
And just seeing how it's evolved and how like flexible it's becoming is really nice, because I feel like a lot of people are turned off by the idea of traditional therapy. So now that therapy is kind of forming to everybody's needs and kind of becoming more focused on certain areas that maybe haven't been focused on in the past, I think it's really great and really beneficial. And how you mentioned like men's mental health, it's really important to take all of this information and apply it to the men in your life as well, because it's so easy for everybody to just dismiss men and, you know, say like, oh, well, you just need to man up, or you're being such a girl, you're being a baby. We need to show men the same compassion and the same listening ear that we give to anybody else who opens up about mental health. Because actually in my depression episode, I talked about how men are diagnosed less than women, but they're 4 times more likely to kill themselves when diagnosed with depression, because they don't have the same outlets, or they don't have the same respect, or people won't listen to them or hear them out. So in order to help everybody, including men, we need to give them that same respect or same measures we would as if a woman was opening up to us.
Yeah, and that's where the statistic, because I have experience with this from in college, hi Nala, where men's mental health is not, you know, as well accepted. And the statistic of like 22 veterans a day kill themselves because they have PTSD, or they some form of mental health or trauma that is just not taken seriously, or they don't know how to deal with it because they were never taught. So I think that's a very good message as well, for anyone listening, since I do have a lot of female followers. It's important for us to do our part as it is them to do theirs.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone has to do their own part.
But I know we went over, I usually try to keep these under 30 minutes, but it was such a good seasonal episode, and I think people will relate to this, so we kind of went a little bit over, but that's okay. Any final thoughts, any final wrap-ups? How can people find you? I mean, I know you're going to be tagged in the live, but where can they find your podcast?
Yes. So my podcast Instagram is at the Search For Serotonin on Instagram. In my link tree in the bio of the podcast Instagram, there is a link to the podcast. You can find it on Spotify. You can find it on Apple Podcasts. Also, I have links to my website And on my website, I have a full list of Amazon products that you can link to. They're all like self-care items. If you want to get the like seasonal depression happy light, or you want to get like a weighted blanket, I have those kind of things linked.
Weighted blankets are great.
Yeah. Oh, I love them so much. But I have that linked in my bio as well. And then I put together a 30-day digital journal. So every day you have a self-care activity, an affirmation, and then a journal prompt to reflect on. I originally
I don't forget about that. I don't know why I forgot, because I even like gave her feedback on this. No, it's really good, guys. Like it's it'll be delivered each day to your email. I think it's or is it all in one?
I switched it because I was going to charge for it, but then I decided to just make it a free resource. So you can actually go on the website, download the whole thing, and you don't have to pay for it, because I think it's really beneficial for people to do these kind of things, especially during seasonal depression during this time of year. So I just wanted to make it a free resource that everybody has access to. So if you're somebody who wants to get into journaling, but you don't necessarily know how to, I have 30 days of prompts laid out. So that can be really helpful for a lot of people. So that is free on my website. So no more paying for it, but it is available for people to download. And that is all in the link tree on my bio.
Okay, perfect. And people, take advantage of the journaling, because it sounds woo, or it sounds super simple, but the simplest things, that's the whole premise of this podcast, like Instagram series, it's not a podcast, but it's simple tips and the simple things that people tend to overlook that are going to make the biggest change in your life. So like writing things down, it may seem, I'm not going to do that. Try it. If, you have nothing else to lose. So just try journaling. It helps immensely. Even though it could sound silly to you.
I also put tips in the journal as well. So I kind of lay out what kind of environment you should be doing it in, and then kind of how to get yourself into the right mindset before journaling. So like I said, if you're someone who doesn't journal or hasn't journaled in the past, hopefully those tips can help you out and get you into the space so you can actually benefit from the journaling.
Perfect. Thank you. I know you have stuff to do with mom probably, because Carolyn's at home with our parents right now. I'm not going because of being pregnant.
Yeah.
And I'm going to wrap up some things here before I go pick up Char, and we have our friend Christmas dinner. Ooh. So I thank you for everyone tuning in live or watching the replay. Carolyn, thank you for sharing tips and the resources with us. Anyone listening, go give her a podcast to listen and like and subscribe, as Charlotte would say. Thank you for being with me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was so much fun. This is my first live, so I had a great time.
You did amazing.
Thank you. I'm a podcaster. I know how to talk, so.
Oh, Carolyn knows how to talk. Trust me. Okay. Tell mom I said hey.
All right, I will. Bye.
Thank you guys. Bye.